It was another quiet morning at the marina. The sun was just starting to peek over the water, making everything shine like gold. The boats rocked gently in their spots, and the seagulls flew overhead, calling to each other in the usual noisy chatter. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. But deep inside the marina community, trouble was quietly brewing. It wasn't the weather, and it wasn't the sea. No, this time, the storm was coming from someone very familiar: HOA Karen. Karen was the kind of person everyone knew but no one really liked. She was always watching. Always judging. And worst of all, she always had a list of rules, some that made sense, and some that were just plain crazy. The other residents often joked that Karen didn't sleep, she spent her nights thinking of ways to tell someone off. On this particular morning, Karen was already awake and pacing near the marina gate. Her arms were folded tightly, her face red with irritation. She had spotted someone she didn't like the day before, and now she was ready to confront them. But little did she know, today would be different. Today, Karen's usual tricks and shouting would not work the way she planned. Meanwhile, at the far end of the marina, the protagonist noticed Karen from a distance. They had seen her many times before, storming around the docks, yelling at guests, making rules appear out of nowhere, and generally causing tension. But today, the protagonist had decided to take a stand. They couldn't let Karen continue to break the community's harmony. And yes, they had a plan. As the protagonist walked down the quiet paths of the marina, they watched the water sparkle and the boat sway. Everything was so calm, so peaceful, that it almost felt like nothing could go wrong. The wind whispered through the trees, and the sound of a distant motorboat added a gentle hum to the morning. But inside, there was a sense of anticipation. Something big was about to happen, and everyone would notice it soon enough. The neighbors were still waking up. Some were jogging along the water, headphones in, completely unaware of the drama brewing near the gate. Others were sipping coffee on their porches, glancing at the boats and enjoying the calm morning. No one could guess that by noon, the whole marina would be buzzing with chaos, all because of Karen and one brave resident who had finally decided enough was enough. Karen's car pulled up near the gate. She stepped out, her heels clicking loudly on the pavement, her face showing a mix of determination and rage. She looked around, making sure someone would see her making a scene. Karen liked attention, it was one of her favorite hobbies. From the shadows of a nearby dock, the protagonist watched quietly. They didn't want to start a fight yet. They knew that Karen would create chaos if she saw them preparing anything. Patience was key. Today, they had a plan that would make sure Karen's screaming would echo across the marina, but only after she had no choice but to face the consequences. The marina gate itself stood tall and sturdy, a silent witness to the coming storm. It was a simple gate, nothing fancy, but it symbolized order and rules for the community. The protagonist thought about how Karen had bent the rules before, letting her friends and guests into the marina even when they weren't supposed to enter. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't safe. Something had to be done. As Karen leaned against her car, muttering to herself, she pulled out her phone and started texting. She was probably sending angry messages to the HOA office or complaining to her friends. The protagonist couldn't hear her words, but they could feel the tension in the air. Karen's energy was sharp and loud, like electricity before a storm. At that moment, a few neighbors started to notice her. One elderly man shook his head and muttered, "Here we go again." Another neighbor, a young woman walking her dog, sighed and whispered, "I hope she doesn't start yelling today." Everyone seemed to know the routine. Karen gets upset, she screams, she complains, and everyone else watches, waiting for the storm to pass. But this morning was different. The calm before the storm was deceptive. The protagonist felt their heart beat faster, not with fear, but with excitement. Today, Karen wouldn't be able to control the situation. Today, the tables were turning. As the minutes passed, Karen started pacing back and forth. Her voice, though quiet at first, began to rise. "This isn't allowed. They can't just do that. I'm calling the office," she shouted, mostly to herself. Her anger seemed endless. And yet, she had no idea that her usual tactics wouldn't work this time. The protagonist took a deep breath. They looked at the gate and then back at Karen. It felt like a simple decision, but it carried so much weight. If they acted now, it could create a scene. People would talk, rumors would fly, and Karen would scream like she never had before. And that's exactly what made the moment perfect. Sometimes, change doesn't come quietly. Sometimes, you have to shake things up to make people listen. The calm morning, the peaceful Marina, and the unaware neighbors, all of it was about to be disrupted in a way no one could ignore. Karen stopped pacing and stood near the gate, hands on her hips, scanning the area. She was certain she had spotted something suspicious, someone breaking the rules, someone daring to defy her. But she couldn't see clearly yet. The protagonist stayed hidden, patient, watching every move, calculating the perfect time to act. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting bright light over the marina. Everything looked normal: boats, water, trees, but underneath the surface, tension simmered. This was the calm before the storm. Everyone could feel it, even if they didn't know it yet. Something was coming that would shake the marina to its core. And then, in that quiet, suspenseful moment, the protagonist smiled slightly. They knew that soon, Karen would lose control. Her screams would fill the air. The neighbors would watch in shock, some in amusement, and one very brave resident would finally make a stand. The calm morning was ending, and the chaos was about to begin. The marina would never feel the same again, and Karen was about to discover that she couldn't control everything. The first hint of a storm was here, and no one could turn back now. The morning at the marina had passed quietly, but the calm was only a mask. Beneath the surface, the protagonist was thinking, planning, and waiting. Karen's temper was infamous, but today, something inside the protagonist had shifted. They couldn't just watch her chaos anymore. Today, they would take action. From the corner of the marina, hidden behind a row of tall boats, the protagonist pulled out a small notebook. It wasn't anything fancy, just a plain spiral notebook, but inside, it held a plan. Not a reckless plan, but a clever one. A plan that would force Karen to confront reality. Karen was still near the gate, pacing, muttering, and occasionally glancing at the water as if the boats themselves were conspiring against her. The protagonist observed her carefully, noting how she reacted to every small sound. Every shout from a seagull or the hum of a boat motor made her jump or glare. Karen's energy was chaotic, and the protagonist knew they could use that to their advantage. The first step of the plan was simple: control the gate. Karen loved attention, loved having power over others, and loved bending the rules. If the gate could be locked, even for a little while, she would be trapped by her own fury. The protagonist smiled. Just the thought of Karen's reaction made their heart race. But they couldn't act recklessly. Karen was unpredictable. One wrong move, and she would call the office, the neighbors, even the local news if she had the chance. No, this had to be precise. Every move, every step, had to be calculated. The protagonist checked the surroundings again. The marina was still quiet, and most of the neighbors were busy with their routines. Joggers ran past, dogs barked, and the distant splash of a boat cutting through the water added rhythm to the morning. Perfect. No distractions. No witnesses yet. Next, the protagonist thought about Karen's guests. She often invited people into the marina without permission, ignoring the rules that everyone else had to follow. This had caused tension before, arguments, and even small fights. The protagonist decided, not only would the gate be locked, but Karen's guests would be banned temporarily. It was bold, it was daring, and it was exactly what was needed. Pulling out their phone, the protagonist sent a quick message to a few trusted neighbors. Plan in motion. Stand by. It was vague enough to avoid suspicion but enough to ensure support if needed. After all, Karen's chaos had affected more than one person, and some neighbors had quietly agreed that something had to change. Then came the hardest part: timing. Karen was unpredictable, and she could act at any moment. The protagonist had to wait for the perfect window, a moment when Karen's attention was elsewhere, maybe distracted by her phone or muttering about rules. Timing was everything. As they waited, the protagonist remembered all the times Karen had yelled, stormed, and created drama in the past. Her energy was always intense, explosive, like a volcano waiting to erupt. And yet, today, they felt different. Today, the protagonist wasn't afraid. Today, they had the control. And for the first time, they felt a rush of power that was exhilarating. Suddenly, Karen's voice cut through the quiet. "This isn't right. They can't just do this," she shouted, pacing faster, her hands flailing. The protagonist froze, then smiled slightly. Perfect timing. Karen had fully engaged her own chaos, leaving the gate and her guests vulnerable. The plan would have 3 steps. Lock the gate. No exceptions. No warnings. Just action. Ban Karen's guests. Make it clear that rules applied equally to everyone. Wait and watch. Let Karen face the consequences of her own behavior. It seemed simple on paper, but in reality, it was daring. Bold moves always carried risk. But the protagonist felt ready. The risk was worth it if it meant finally teaching Karen a lesson and restoring peace to the marina. The sun climbed higher, reflecting brightly on the water. Karen had stopped pacing momentarily, pulling out her phone and tapping furiously. The protagonist took a deep breath. This was the moment. The plan was about to move from thought to action. They moved quietly, almost like a shadow, toward the gate. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. From their vantage point, they could see Karen clearly, still unaware of what was about to happen. The anticipation built like electricity in the air, and the calm marina suddenly felt like a stage ready for drama. The protagonist's hand hovered over the lock. A small twist, a click, and the gate would be closed. It seemed almost symbolic, the control, the order, and the quiet statement that chaos had limits. And Karen, well, Karen's reaction would be worth every second. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The seagulls flew past lazily, the boat swayed gently, and the distant hum of the water was almost meditative. But beneath the calm, tension was building. Karen was moments away from discovering the change, from realizing that today, her usual power was gone. The protagonist smiled again, quietly savoring the suspense. The plan was set. The gate would be locked, Karen's guests would be banned, and the storm she would create, well, that storm was about to be unleashed. And in that quiet morning, just before action, the protagonist knew one thing for certain: the marina would never be the same again. The morning sun was higher now, bright on the calm waters, but the peace was about to shatter. From behind the row of boats, the protagonist moved silently toward the gate. Every step was careful, precise. Their heart beat faster, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. Today, the marina would finally see Karen in a way she had never been seen before. Karen, as usual, was pacing, phone in hand, muttering to herself. She hadn't noticed the shadow moving near the gate. She didn't suspect that anyone had the courage or the patience to take control of the situation. Her mind was focused entirely on her own frustration, her own rules, and her own guests. The protagonist reached the gate. Their hand gripped the lock, feeling the cold metal against their fingers. With a small twist and a click, the gate was shut. Locked. Sealed. No one could enter without permission, not Karen, not her guests, not anyone. The sound of the lock clicking was almost imperceptible, but to the protagonist, it rang like a bell of victory. They stepped back into the shadows, watching. And then, it began. Karen noticed it first as a shift in the air, a silence, a sudden barrier. She stepped closer to the gate, leaning over to try the handle. "What the?" Her voice was sharp, confused, growing louder by the second. She pulled harder, tugged at the metal, as if sheer force could undo what had been done. But the lock held firm. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She twisted the handle again, shaking it violently. The sound of her footsteps echoed across the quiet marina. Neighbors, still casually enjoying the morning, paused. They sensed something was happening. Karen's panic was growing, like a storm building momentum. "Who did this?" she screamed suddenly, her voice cracking with rage. Her hands pounded the gate as if it were a living thing, daring her to control it. The protagonist stayed hidden, silent, letting Karen stew in her own fury. A few residents came closer, curious. They peeked from behind corners and dock posts, whispering among themselves. Some tried to stifle giggles. The sight of Karen struggling with a simple gate was both shocking and oddly satisfying. For once, she wasn't in control. Karen pulled out her phone and started calling everyone she could think of, the HOA office, her friends, even neighbors she knew would agree with her. Her words tumbled out, frantic, sharp, and loud, "You have to do something. They locked the gate. This isn't allowed." Meanwhile, the protagonist quietly checked that the gate was secure and that Karen's guests were blocked. The small acts of control felt monumental. It was a simple twist of metal, a rule enforced correctly, but in that moment, it was a statement. Karen couldn't scream her way through this. Not today. Karen, however, was far from calm. She jumped up and down, banging on the gate, screaming at anyone who dared look. Her face was red, her hair slightly disheveled, and her voice carried across the marina like a warning siren. Neighbors whispered and pointed. The usually composed marina had turned into a stage for her dramatic chaos. The protagonist took a step back, watching the scene unfold like a slow-motion drama. Karen's energy was wild, untamed, and unpredictable. Yet she couldn't do anything about the locked gate or the ban on her guests. The power she thrived on was suddenly gone. And the chaos that erupted from her frustration was almost beautiful to watch. Karen's screams echoed through the docks, bouncing off the boats, reaching every corner of the marina. It was as if the water itself vibrated with her anger. A few neighbors cautiously came closer, whispering and exchanging glances. Even those who disliked confrontation found themselves captivated by the scene. The protagonist, calm amidst the storm, felt a mix of adrenaline and relief. The plan had worked. Karen had lost control, and for the first time, her chaos had consequences. Her guests were blocked. The gate was secure. And Karen was screaming like she had never screamed before. Then, in a sudden twist, Karen tried something new. She reached for her keys and attempted to force her car through the gate. The metal creaked, but the lock held. She stomped, she shouted, she waved her hands wildly, but it was no use. The protagonist had thought ahead, securing everything carefully. Every detail of the plan was working perfectly. And in that moment, a few neighbors began to cheer quietly, clapping for the bravery it took to stand up to Karen. It was subtle, but Karen noticed. Her anger flared even higher. She turned her fury toward anyone watching, shaking her finger, yelling, and demanding silence. But the protagonist remained hidden, watching, letting the drama reach its peak. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Karen's screams, the banging on the gate, the whispers of the neighbors, it all blended into a tense, chaotic symphony. And through it all, the protagonist stayed calm, knowing that once Karen reached her breaking point, the storm would reveal itself fully, and the marina would never forget this day. Finally, Karen paused for a moment, breathing heavily, eyes wide with disbelief. She stared at the locked gate, at the frustrated neighbors, and at the realization that she had been outsmarted. The quiet before her next outburst was almost eerie. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The protagonist smiled slightly, knowing this was only the beginning. Karen's chaos had been contained for now, but the echo of her screams would linger, a reminder that for once, someone had the courage to stand up to her. And as the sun reflected off the marina's waters, sparkling like tiny fireworks, the calm that had existed earlier seemed gone forever. The stage was set for even more drama to unfold in the coming hours. The marina had transformed. What was once a peaceful morning now felt like the calm after the first cracks of a storm, but the real storm had just begun. Karen's screams pierced the air, sharp and unrelenting, echoing across the docks like a warning to anyone who dared watch. She stood at the locked gate, her hands clenching the metal bars as if she could squeeze the truth out of them. "This isn't allowed. This isn't fair," she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the boats and the water, carrying to the farthest corners of the marina. Her face was red, her eyes wide, and every muscle in her body screamed tension. Neighbors stopped in their tracks. Some froze in shock, others whispered to one another, and a few tried not to laugh, knowing Karen's reputation for dramatic outbursts. But nothing could have prepared them for this. Today, her energy was untamed, explosive, and directed at the one thing she could not control, the locked gate. The protagonist watched from a safe distance, heart pounding, not with fear, but with a thrilling sense of vindication. Every scream from Karen confirmed that their plan was working. Every flailing hand, every angry stomp, every furious shout was proof that today, someone had finally dared to stand up to her. Karen's fury escalated. She screamed at the neighbors, pointing fingers, shaking her fists. "Why aren't you helping me? Who did this?" Her voice was desperate now, raw with frustration. Her usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by pure, uncontrollable chaos. One neighbor, an elderly man with a cane, muttered under his breath, "She's lost it, completely." A young mother clutched her child, whispering, "Wow, she's really going off today." Even the seagulls seemed to sense the tension, flying in circles above the marina as if echoing the chaos below. Karen stomped on the pavement, her heels making sharp, impatient clicks. She tried to call the HOA again, dialing repeatedly, her hands shaking with anger. But each call only reminded her that the protagonist had covered every detail. Every loophole she had relied on for power was gone. The gate wouldn't budge. Her guests couldn't enter. Her usual tactics had failed spectacularly. And then, in a moment of pure hysteria, Karen began pounding the gate with her fists, each hit echoing like a drumbeat of fury. Her voice rose to a deafening pitch, her words a jumble of threats and complaints. She screamed so loudly that even the distant boats seemed to quiver. From the shadows, the protagonist could see the fear, the embarrassment, and the pure chaos that now consumed Karen. It wasn't malicious, it was the natural reaction of someone used to control who suddenly had none. And yet, as intense as it was, there was a strange beauty in the scene, order finally meeting chaos, rules finally standing firm against tyranny. Karen's energy was relentless. She ran from side to side, calling out to anyone who might help, her gestures frantic. "You can't do this to me. I'm HOA. I have rights. You're breaking the rules." Her voice cracked as she screamed, the anger and panic feeding each other in a cycle that seemed impossible to stop. The neighbors began to react more openly. Some filmed with their phones, careful not to be noticed, knowing the scene was unforgettable. Some shouted at her to calm down, while others simply stood frozen, mesmerized by the spectacle. It was as if the entire marina had become an audience to a theater of chaos. Meanwhile, the protagonist stayed calm. They didn't intervene. They didn't shout or call out. They let Karen unravel, letting the drama reach its peak. Each scream, each stomp, each furious gesture confirmed one simple truth: today, Karen could not win. And that, more than anything, brought a quiet satisfaction to the protagonist. Karen's fury reached a new level when she realized she could not even call her friends to help. Her phone calls went unanswered. Messages left in frustration bounced back with polite replies from neighbors who had finally grown tired of her nonsense. Her isolation only fueled the intensity of her screaming, creating a chaotic rhythm that dominated the marina. And then, as if on cue, a sudden silence fell. Karen paused, breathing heavily, her chest heaving. Her eyes darted around, scanning the crowd of neighbors, the locked gate, and the empty marina paths beyond. She realized, in a fleeting moment of clarity, that she had been outsmarted. She had no control, no power, and no one to rely on but herself. The silence was brief. Karen's voice returned, now trembling, louder, and more desperate. "This isn't over. You'll regret this. I will." She stopped mid-sentence, realizing she was screaming into empty air. Her power, her influence, and her usual chaos had all collided with one simple fact: rules were rules, and someone had enforced them. The protagonist took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Karen's dramatic meltdown had lasted longer than expected, but it was effective. The chaos had revealed the truth: she could no longer intimidate, yell, or manipulate without consequence. Today, the marina had witnessed something new: a balance between order and chaos. And while Karen continued her frustrated shouts, the neighbors began to relax, some even smiling. The tension in the air slowly lifted, replaced by the curious hum of life at the marina. Boats swayed gently in the water again, seagulls flew lazily, and the sun shone brighter. But the memory of Karen's screaming, wild and uncontrolled, lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. The protagonist knew this was only part one of the chaos. Karen's energy would not disappear completely. She would regroup, plan, and find another way to assert control. But for now, the marina had survived her storm, and the locked gate and the rules it represented stood firm. The echoes of her screams faded, replaced by whispers, laughter, and the soft sounds of water. The calm had returned, but the tension remained, like a heartbeat waiting for the next moment of drama. And everyone who had witnessed it knew, today, Karen had truly lost her control. The echoes of Karen's screaming had finally faded, leaving the marina unusually quiet. But peace didn't last long. The residents, who had been watching from a safe distance, began to stir. Some whispered nervously, some chuckled quietly, and others exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Did that really just happen? Mrs. Thompson, who lived in the corner house overlooking the docks, clutched her cup of coffee. "I've seen Karen yell before," she whispered to her husband, "but that was something else. She sounded like a banshee." Her husband nodded, still staring toward the locked gate, shaking his head. From the opposite side, a group of younger neighbors had pulled out their phones. "We have to film this," one said, barely able to hide a grin. "This is gold. She's never lost like this before." Laughter bubbled quietly among them, careful not to attract Karen's wrath, though she was safely locked out at the moment. Mr. Patel, the quiet man who usually kept to himself, crossed his arms and muttered under his breath, "Finally. Someone actually stood up to her. I thought it would never happen." His neighbors nodded in agreement. There was a sense of shared relief, a small victory for the marina, even if Karen herself didn't see it that way. But not everyone was amused. Across the dock, a few residents shook their heads. "I feel bad for her," one said softly. "Yes, she's controlling, but she's always like this. I don't know if she can handle it." Others, however, simply smiled, enjoying the rare moment of Karen being powerless. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread like wildfire. "Did you see her?" one neighbor asked another. "Her face was red. She screamed so loud." People who had been ignoring the drama before were now talking about it. Soon, the marina was buzzing, not with boats or waves, but with gossip. A child tugged at his mother's hand. "Mom, why is Karen so angry?" The mother tried to explain gently. "She likes to be in charge. Sometimes she gets upset when things don't go her way." The child frowned, clearly processing the chaos he had witnessed. From behind a corner, the protagonist watched all of this, staying calm while Karen's former influence crumbled around her. Each reaction from the neighbors reinforced what they already knew: standing up to Karen had not only worked but had changed the dynamics of the community. People were finally seeing her as fallible, as human, as someone who could be stopped. Some neighbors, emboldened by the events, started to voice their support. "I've had enough of her drama," one man admitted. "It's nice to see someone finally take a stand." Others nodded quietly, sharing silent smiles. The marina had experienced a subtle shift, like the first crack in a dam. Karen's control had been challenged, and people realized it could happen again. Even the more cautious residents started joining the conversation, though carefully. "Do you think she'll yell again?" a woman asked nervously. A young couple shrugged. "Probably. But at least for now, she's out of control." Their smiles were small, but full of quiet triumph. The gossip grew louder, spreading from dock to dock, house to house. Everyone had a version of what happened. Some exaggerated Karen's screams, making them sound even more insane. Others focused on the protagonist's bravery. "Did you see how calm they were?" one neighbor whispered. "Just standing there while she lost it." As the day went on, the neighbors' reactions evolved. Some laughed quietly, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some discussed the rules and Karen's obsession with them. And some began to quietly wonder, could they all finally stand up to her if they wanted to? For the first time, Karen wasn't the untouchable force of chaos she usually seemed to be. The protagonist felt a quiet satisfaction watching the reactions unfold. The marina, for the first time in a long while, felt like a real community, not one ruled by fear or yelling, but by shared understanding and courage. The ripple effect of Karen's meltdown was clear. Her influence had weakened, her control challenged, and her neighbors were finally seeing her in a new light. Yet, in the midst of this, a small unease lingered. Karen wasn't gone. She was still angry, still planning, still unpredictable. The neighbors knew that sooner or later, she would try to reclaim her power. But for now, at least, they had won a small victory. And in a community where one person had always dominated, even a small victory felt enormous. By mid-afternoon, the marina had returned to a semblance of normal. Boats swayed gently, seagulls called overhead, and the wind rustled through the trees. But beneath the surface, the whispers and glances persisted. Everyone who had witnessed Karen's meltdown knew something important: things would never be quite the same again. The protagonist smiled, watching quietly. They had started the chain reaction, and now the community itself was reacting. Karen's chaos had been contained, her screaming had left its mark, and the neighbors, they were waking up to the possibility of standing together. And somewhere behind the locked gate, Karen was still furious, unaware that her neighbors were no longer entirely under her spell. The stage was set for the next chapter, and everyone in the marina knew it. This was far from over. By late afternoon, the marina had calmed down, but the air was thick with tension. Karen, locked out and furious, retreated to her car, muttering and plotting. Her face was still flushed from the earlier screaming, her hair slightly messy, and her hands trembled as she gripped her phone. She wasn't finished, not by a long shot. From inside her car, she typed messages at lightning speed, her words sharp and desperate. "This is unacceptable. Someone locked the gate, banned their guests. I demand immediate action." But every reply she received was polite, neutral, and completely unhelpful. The HOA office couldn't intervene because the rules had been followed. Karen's frustration grew, bubbling like a storm ready to explode again. Meanwhile, the protagonist watched discreetly from the other side of the marina. They had expected this. Karen never gave up, never accepted defeat, and she was already planning her next move. The question was, how far would she go this time? Karen stormed out of her car, pacing back and forth as she plotted. Her mind raced. She thought about calling every neighbor she could, sending letters, posting on community boards, even hiring someone to challenge the rules. But no matter what she tried, the locked gate stood firm. Her control, her usual chaos, had failed her completely. As she paused to catch her breath, a few neighbors peeked from behind corners. Some whispered, others smirked. They had seen this scene before: Karen plotting, storming, and muttering, but today felt different. Today, there was a sense of uncertainty in the air. Karen was powerful, yes, but she had been stopped. And now, she was forced to strategize like everyone else. Karen's next move came suddenly. She marched to the nearest neighbor's house and banged on the door. "You have to help me. They can't just do this." Her voice was demanding, urgent, and full of panic. The neighbor, however, remained calm. "Karen, the gate is locked because the rules were followed," they said softly. "You can't break them." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. How could anyone defy her? She had spent years being in charge, bending rules, making her presence felt at every corner of the marina. And now, she was powerless. The humiliation fueled her next move. She returned to the gate, pacing and muttering, trying to find any weakness. There has to be a way, there must be. But the protagonist had already anticipated this. Every angle, every loophole, every trick Karen might use had been accounted for. Today, she could scream, plan, and threaten, but the outcome wouldn't change. Then Karen paused, staring at the locked gate like it was an unsolvable puzzle. The sun reflected off the water, glinting off the metal, making the gate seem almost untouchable. Karen's jaw tightened. She had tried her usual tactics: screaming, demanding, threatening, but nothing worked. In a desperate move, she called the HOA office again, her voice trembling slightly. "This is urgent. You must remove the lock immediately. I'm the HOA. But the office replied firmly, politely, and without fear. The rules were followed. The lock is within regulations. There is nothing we can do. Karen's hands shook. Her usual energy, so wild, so chaotic, was turning inward. She realized she couldn't bully, intimidate, or manipulate her way out of this. For the first time, Karen had to think differently. She had to plan carefully, like everyone else, instead of relying on chaos. Meanwhile, the protagonist stayed hidden, watching, feeling a mix of relief and excitement. Karen's next move was unpredictable, yes, but one thing was certain: the protagonist had already won today. Karen's fury, frustration, and plotting were proof that the rules could be enforced, that someone could stand up to her, and that her control was no longer absolute. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the marina, Karen's frustration simmered into quiet plotting. She wasn't gone. She wasn't defeated forever. But the lesson was clear: even Karen had limits, and sometimes, chaos could be met with order. The neighbors, having witnessed the aftermath of her meltdown and the locked gate, began talking again, this time about strategy. Quiet whispers spread: maybe we can finally stand up to her. The ripple effect of the protagonist's actions was clear: Karen's reign of chaos was no longer untouchable. And somewhere, deep inside Karen, a seed of obsession was planted. She wasn't finished. She would come back. She would plan. And one day, she would try again. But for now, the marina and the protagonist had the upper hand. The stage was set for the final showdown, one that no one would forget. The sun began to sink low over the marina, painting the water gold and pink. The air was quiet now, almost peaceful, but it wasn't the same peace as the morning. The chaos of earlier had left its mark. Boats rocked gently in the water, seagulls called lazily overhead, and a few neighbors strolled along the docks, whispering about what had just happened. Karen was gone from the gate. For now. Her screams had faded, replaced by quiet muttering as she retreated to her car. Her face was still flushed with anger, her hair messy, but her fury had simmered into a slow, simmering storm. Today, she had lost, and she knew it. The protagonist walked slowly toward the gate, checking it once more to ensure everything was secure. The lock still held firm. Karen's guests remained banned, as planned. The marina, finally, was under calm order again. There was a quiet satisfaction in the air, not just for the protagonist, but for everyone who had witnessed Karen's meltdown. Neighbors peeked out from porches and docks, offering small smiles or nods of approval. Some quietly applauded the courage it had taken to stand up to Karen, while others laughed softly, still replaying the drama in their minds. The marina felt different now. The balance had shifted. For the first time in a long while, people realized they could exist without fear of Karen's chaos dominating every corner of their community. From behind a dock, the protagonist watched it all, a subtle smile on their face. They had planned carefully, acted decisively, and let Karen unravel on her own. The gate had done more than block her guests, it had blocked her control. And for today, that was enough. Karen, however, was far from finished. Inside her car, she clenched her fists and stared out the window at the marina. Her mind was racing, already spinning new plans, new schemes, and new ways to regain power. She was stubborn, relentless, and unpredictable. The calm today was temporary, the next move would be hers. Yet, for now, the protagonist allowed themselves a small moment of peace. The neighbors had seen the power of standing up to chaos. The marina had survived its storm. And the lessons of today would ripple quietly through the community for days to come. As evening descended, the marina settled into a golden twilight. Lights flickered on along the docks, reflecting softly on the water. Boats creaked gently, and the breeze whispered through the trees. It was a calm like no other, a calm that had been earned, not given. Still, somewhere in the back of everyone's minds, a single question lingered: what would Karen do next? Would she return, louder and more furious than ever? Or had this moment taught her that control wasn't always hers to take? The protagonist didn't know the answer. They only knew this: today, they had taken a stand. Today, they had proven that chaos, no matter how loud or fearsome, could be met with calm, careful action. and as the last rays of sunlight shimmered on the marina, a quiet smile crossed the protagonist's face. The calm after the chaos was beautiful, but just beneath it, the tension of what was to come promised that the story was far from over. The gate remained locked, the rules remained firm, and Karen's fury simmered silently in the distance. The marina had survived, but everyone knew the next chapter was only a heartbeat away. The calm had returned, but the storm? That storm was still waiting.